In this video, I'll be showing you how to change out your Coleman 200cc mini bike crankshaft from a 5/8 quarter shaft to a 3/4. And the reason for doing this is to be able to fit a torque converter on it. Most torque converter sizes come in a 3/4 inch. And so with having that 5/8 crankshaft, a lot of your torque converters, and including even a lot of your the serpentine clutches, are not going to fit it. You can get them, but it's just easier to get 3/4 from what I've experienced. So just making this change out makes it easier on the long run, and then the torque converter gives you a lot more power and the convenience of the low end torque, and then also having the high end speed is why I wanted to go to a torque converter. So that being said, I picked up the crankshaft. It's specified for a Honda. This is a Honda clone, like Chinese type motor. It's around 27 bucks for the crankshaft on eBay, and I'll put that in the description. But what we'll be doing is just unbolting the engine, disassembling it just to get it from the frame. There are some modifications that you have to make to the frame, and we'll go over it in this video as well. But right now I'm just taking all the wires off, taking the bolts off, and getting ready to pull the cover off there. So we'll remove all of these bolts here and start with getting the crankshaft swapped. When you take this off, if your crankshaft did not come with a gasket or seal, you'll want to be just careful pulling it off. You don't want to rip your gasket if you need to reuse it. I just wiped it out and make sure there's no like metal fragment or anything in there. And what you'll do is go ahead and just pull the gasket off. Once again, just be careful. You don't want to rip it. Mine came with new ones, so I wasn't really too worried about it. This is the new crankshaft. It's the 3/4 inch, and that's what we'll be pulling out. We'll pull the old 5/8 off the Coleman there. So when you pull this little mechanism out, there are two little, I don't know what they're called, the little head thingies are going to fall out. And so just be careful, you don't want to lose them, drop them. I freaking dropped in the bucket and had to clean it all off. It's a pain in the butt. There was actually paint in that bucket, so yeah. But anyways, so once the little guys are out, you'll want to take the two bolts off of the shaft itself. They're kind of difficult. When I was doing this, the crankshaft where the key sets, it's super freaking sharp, and so just be careful to not cut yourself, because I cut myself really bad. Like, it was a super deep cut. So anyways, just be careful with that. I was trying to get it to come loose, and it ended up slipping, and it just went right across the key or the crankshaft itself and sliced it. So anyways, just be careful. Yep, so that's it. That's what I get for not being careful. You may have to spin it a little bit to be able to get it out. Once you get it out, we'll be able to put the new 3/4 inch shaft in. Mine wasn't going in the greatest, so I had to give it a little love tap to get it lined up. And once I got it in there, we will go ahead and put those bolts back on. For the bolts themselves, I do not know the torque specifications on them. Do apologize. But I just did it hand tight. You can even put a little bit of Loctite on it if you want, just to make sure they don't come loose. But just hand tight, or not necessarily hand tight, but pretty tight. Just keep in mind that if you do it too tight, you may strip it, and that would be a disaster. So just tighten it up if you want. Like I said, use a little Loctite to keep it from coming loose and vibrating loose while the engine's in motion. Alright, so we are going to be connecting the dots. You'll want to line that dot up with the dot that is on the crankshaft to make sure that the timing is correct. So I had to take the valve cover off to be able to line up those little valves again. Once you get the valve cover off, you'll see what I'm talking about. You just put that back in its seated position, and you'll be able to get the cover back on. So once we got that all tightened back down, we'll be able to put the crankshaft cover on, and I had to love tap it a little bit to get it to go in place. So I'm not quite sure what the specs are on these bolts are supposed to be. Everything I could find online seemed way too tight, so I would just tighten it up the best that you can. If you want to use a little drop of Loctite, you can. Just be careful, because if you have to get back in the motor, you don't want to use too much and not be able to get it off. Go ahead and fill it up with motor oil. I use, I think, 10W40. You use 10W30 if you want, and either's fine. You have to take the chain guard off and cut it. I used a Sawzall to cut it. And then I had to make some tubes to be able to lift the engine up a little bit to make room for the torque converter. With these tubes being spaced out about an inch or so, I did have to get longer motor mount bolts, and so you want to get longer bolts, and I can send you the ones that I got, specs on those. Then also I had to groove the exhaust cover, because it was a little bit, it wasn't fitting in there. The pipe was blocking it, so I made 2 cuts. I think I may have used a Sawzall for it. Use whatever you want. But that being said, I cut 2 little lines in it, and then I used like a punch to indent it, make like an L, a little groove, and that pops right in there between the frame itself. So that little tube sets in between it, and it worked pretty good. So that being said, you can remove it all together if you want, but just keep in mind, if you do, it's going to be freaking super hot if you touch your leg on it. That shield's just there to make the heat dissipate, make it shield it from your leg a little bit. Right, go ahead and tighten the motor back to the frame. You want to make sure it's lined up so your chain's not off. And then also we'll go ahead and get your torque converter kit out, and we'll go ahead and start getting that mounted. When you're putting this plate on, that comes with some spacers. You want to make sure that it's spaced enough to where the plate is not hitting the bolts. So you want to make sure there's a little bit of a gap there. So I have another video that shows you how to adjust the torque converter as far as having more torque or more speed. And that's what those little holes that I'm pointing out now are. You'll be able to click on that link in the video, and it will take you right to my other video showing you how to make those adjustments. So the bolts that the torque converter came with were not long enough for the shaft itself. So I actually had to order some separate bolts, and I will attach the link of where I bought those from, and I'll put that in the description. But once you get the bolt in there, for me, I use a little bit of Loctite. It's just and I do just like a drop because it's hard to get the screw in tight because it's trying to spin. I did have a impact wrench, so that makes it easier. If you don't, it's going to be really hard to get that tight because it's going to want to spin. But just like a drop of Loctite helped me, and it prevents it from coming loose. And it's not too bad to get it back off. So for me, which is just a tiny drop, it just helps it, keeps it from coming loose. And it's still pretty easy to get off if you have a impact wrench. If you don't have an impact wrench and you put Loctite on it and you try to get it off later with it trying to spin, it's going to be a nightmare. So just keep that in mind. When you're putting the throttle cable back in, just make sure that the spring is in there so it retracts, or it relieves itself after the throttle's been pulled. When I did it the first time, I forgot to put the spring in there, so just don't forget that spring, and that way you don't have any problems with the throttle not going back to idle after it's been pulled. This is the torque converter cover that it comes with. I notched it. I just used some tin clips for the chain to be able to go through it. The cover just helps, keep dirt and junk out of the torque converter itself, and it also protects your leg from riding when you're riding, so you don't get your leg caught in the spinning parts. Anyways, this is the final result of the torque converter cover and the chain being on itself. So yeah, let me know what y'all think, and if you had any problems. I'd really appreciate y'all watching. If you don't mind, like the video and subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out. And once again, if you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments. Y'all have a good day.